everyone, it's Horror Free For All, and I hope you're doing well today. I have here a film review of a movie that came out straight to Hulu this year in 2024 for Huluween. I guess Hulu is now doing original Halloween movies. You have this movie I'm reviewing and another movie coming out at the time of me making this review within the next week or so. So I'm excited after seeing this first one this year of what Hulu has to bring to the horror genre. This film was written by Carl Reed and Brandon Espy and also directed by Brandon Espy. And the film in question is Mr. Crocket. Now, Mr. Crocket is played by this actor known as Elvis Nolasco. The only thing I recognize him from is a film called, I think, Old Boy. And if you haven't seen that movie, it's such a weird movie, but it's so good. And when I heard that he was playing the main character of the film, or I guess the draw of the film, Mr. Crocket, who was supposed to be an evil Mr. Rogers type of character, I was sold. And when I saw the trailer of this thing, the inner kid in me was like, man, I can kind of see the appeal to this one. Because when I was younger, I'm not going to lie, I was kind of afraid of Mr. Rogers sometimes. And there's something about this movie, after sitting down and watching it for the first time. I haven't seen it since I watched it, I think, yesterday now. But I keep thinking about this one, and I think it's kind of a new cult classic. It's kind of hard to say that because you need time to really put the word cult in front of it. But I can definitely see this film spawning a franchise of sorts for Hulu if they wanted to continue it. And I think Mr. Crocket could be potentially a horror icon after this first movie. Now, I will say this. I have some pretty noticeable flaws with the movie, but I have to say, if you guys out there are horror aficionados, if you like kids horror, if you grew up watching Mr. Rogers, if you're a fan of like Freddy Krueger and all these iconic, slasher icons from the 80s, you need to check this out just for Elvis Nolasco's performance as Mr. Crocket, and some of the kills in this movie kind of blew me away. So go check this out for that. This concept might not be for everyone, and the story might be kind of messy for a lot of you out there, but I think there's something in here to enjoy for everyone out there. So take that with a grain of salt, but that's just my recommendation. Now, because this movie is new, and plus I'm trying to get out of doing so many spoilers, I'm going to keep this plot overview, what you can kind of expect from this film, very brief and spoiler-free as possible. So the concept of this movie is about this television personality called Mr. Crocket, and he is said to be kind of this interdimensional being within this VHS tape that gets passed around from children in this neighborhood. And the cold open kind of starts off with a blaze of glory of seeing Mr. Crocket in action, and we get to see how he interacts with a kid and his parents. And there might be a death involved with that, and that kicks the whole movie off. And once that is over, we get to meet pretty much the main characters of the rest of the movie. There is a now widowed mother and her young son, who are at the funeral of her husband. This movie takes place in the 90s, but the opening of the film was in 93, and then there's like a fast forward of events, like I think 2 years later in 95, where this entire movie takes place in. And at the funeral, you can see that the son is kind of oblivious to really what happened to his dad, and the mom's kind of concerned for him and wants to make sure that he's really okay, and starts to notice that he has really no interest of going out and meeting friends. He's kind of, left alone at home, and she's looking for something to kind of, liven his spirits up. And she's out in front of her yard one day, walking around the neighborhood, around the block, and there's a little free library on this one corner. And I don't know if there were little free libraries back in the 90s. There could have been. I never saw them, but, to each their own. And she finds this VHS tape of Mr. Crocket in the little free library and brings it home to her son. And her son is like, okay, what is this? Let me try the tape and see what it's like. And he pops it in the VHS player, and he's immediately entranced by the show that's on the tape. And the mom starts to notice that her son wants to spend all of his time watching this VHS tape and does not want to get up. And when she tries to, turn off the tape to get him to listen to her, he throws pretty much a rage fit on her and breaks a picture of his dad and threatens to smash one of his trophies. And this kind of makes her hit a breaking point, and she's like, oh, well, if you're going to act this way, then I can't, I really can't be your mom. And she says it out of angst and anger, but she really didn't mean it. But the son kind of heard that and took that to heart. He goes into his room, and this kicks off what happens shortly after, where she hears the tape kind of coming on by itself, and she's trying to turn it off, but it keeps turning on. And lo and behold, she may or may not have to face Mr. Crocket, who we got to see early on in the movie. And something may or may not happen to this lady's son. Well, as the movie goes along, she tries to tell people what she saw, and the VHS tape, of course, disappeared because Mr. Crocket has that ability to make it disappear. And we see some other families with kids and, kind of shitty parents interacting with Mr. Crocket. And it seems that Mr. Crocket may or may not be building up an army of some sort. And there's a woman that we saw, haven't really touched on it, who the town is kind of considered like a crazy homeless woman that is spouting something that kind of reminds the boy's mother, who has witnessed her son dealing with Mr. Crocket, that this phenomenon might be real. So she starts to look into it and notices a history behind this person. And she meets this other guy who's also, pretty well versed in the Mr. Crocket phenomenon. And eventually he teams up with this mom and the homeless woman, who is pretty much revealed to be a potential character that we already got to see in the early portion of the movie. And the three of them decide that they need to take on Mr. Crocket and save the kids who are pretty much going up missing, and also to help people not be sadistically murdered by this guy who has creative ways of killing people in this movie. I don't want to spoil any specific detail, but there's stuff involving a bubble and and let's just say a plate of food. It is bizarre as shit, but it's awesome and very gory. And of course, they end up finding their way to Mr. Crocket, and there's a big revelation near the end of the film about what this place is, where he's located, where he's brought these children, and this hellish origin of, his personal life and how that ties into what's going on with the current situation. And as the climax plays out, it plays out a certain way in the favor of a particular character, I should say. And by the end, you think it's over, but it may not be over. And that, in a nutshell, is what you're going to expect out of Mr. Crocket. Give or take me not really spoiling who in particular bites the dust here, but expect some more bloodshed than what I've already kind of shared. But yeah, this movie here, I was blown away by the directing ability of this film. I thought the film looked really good. Brandon Espy did a fantastic job on laying out this film in terms of its style, in terms of the editing choice with the VHS effect. There's a lot of fun scenes involving the VHS tape itself in the movie that really do shine. There's an aspect to Mr. Crocket where he carries around this specific item that might be a portal of some sort. That effect stuff looks really cool. There's some really cool shots of Mr. Crocket because, I've already kind of alluded to this. He's like in the television and he can, transmit himself from the television into the VCR and other electronic devices. There's some really creepy shots of Mr. Crocket just coming out of a TV or looking through a VHS player. That stuff is really cool. And the whole hellish world, this Freddy Krueger-like boiler room hellhole that he brings these kids to, is fucking nightmare fuel, man. There is some fun. I don't want to get into too many spoilers about it, but there's some fun design work going on there, whether we're talking about some furry creature friends that might be on this demented Mr. Rogers show, as it pertains, near the end of the film, as we get to see. That stuff looked incredible. Some of the gore and the kills really do shine in this movie. And while there are some quick cuts to not make the gore last too long on the frame, I was shocked that Hulu, of all people, allowed some of these kills to be shown the way they did. I was like, wow. I was eating my words a little bit about Hulu, because before I went into this, I'm like, okay, this is like a TVMA rated R film. I'm expecting neutered kills. I'm expecting not that much gore. But I was shocked by the level of kills and the shots that Brandon Espy was able to pull off. I have to tip my hat to him. He made a great little horror film here. It's really effective at what it does. It kind of plays on what Art the Clown is doing in the Terrifier movies and what Freddy Krueger or Robert Englund did in the original Nightmare on Elm Street films, and blending it with Mr. Rogers. And this, quite honestly, also borrows from something that a lot of you out there might not know, but there's a kids horror anthology show from the early 2010s called The Haunting Hour that had pretty much an evil Mr. Rogers episode called Uncle Howie, played by Tom Kenny, who voiced SpongeBob SquarePants. I also feel like there's some Uncle Howie going on here with the motive of Mr. Crocket, as we get to see in the movie. Which, by the way, Elvis Nolasco, who plays Mr. Crocket, is a show stealer in this movie. He is absolutely terrifying, and he's incredible. The stuff that he does is so fun, and it's so like on the nose corny at times, and I can totally see people being kind of rubbed off by the character because they spend a lot of focus on him in the movie. And there are some times in the film, especially when we're getting into like the repetitive song and dance that we hear constantly on the VHS throughout the movie, that can be kind of annoying, but it's not too much of a negative, because I kind of think of it kind of like the Happy Happy Halloween jingle from the Silver Shamrock commercial in Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, which I think adds a little more tension in that movie, as this movie has a similar effect. But like I said, I think some people could be rubbed off by his performance, or I guess his character, I should say. But I thoroughly enjoyed Mr. Crocket. I think he is one of my new favorite horror icons. He is absolutely incredible. If I see a Mr. Crocket shirt out in Spencer's or Hot Topic or something, I'm probably going to buy it because he was awesome in this movie. And I hope that this man gets to at least do one more of these Mr. Crocket movies, because this is a character with untapped potential, because he's kind of, as you'll learn in the movie, a little impervious to certain things. And there could be a franchise to happen out of this. Now, I'm not saying that you need to squeeze the living life out of this film here to try to get more movies out. But if Hulu wanted to make a follow-up to this, I welcome it. I welcome it, because he was absolutely incredible. And yeah, the movie doesn't really have much of an atmosphere, but going back to the positive about the creativity of this hellish world that Mr. Crocket brings in this film, I love the imagination. I love the drive. I really do think that this film is helped out by some solid acting performances as well. A lot of these actors I don't recognize from much other things, other than Elvis Nolasco, but the acting in this movie was mostly serviceable. Even the kid actors, who weren't necessarily the greatest, they were, fine on their own regards as well. I can't really complain too much. Maybe the younger kid, who I think is named Major in the movie, his acting might be the most spottiest out of all the children, but the children were given some scary moments in the film to kind of make up for their kind of overdrawn cuteness. And this, of course, comes later in the movie. And there's a specific scene that really actually got to me. There's a legit jump scare from this one little girl. And I was like, wow, they actually made me jump scare in this. So, yeah, I was taken aback by just how addicting of a watch this movie was. And it's less than an hour and a half. Yeah, I got to give a round of applause to a lot of these 2024 horror films coming out the gate, especially the low budget ones, aiming for under 90 minutes. That is exactly what you need to do. The pacing on this movie is also really good. It wastes no time getting to the goods. And the premise is so simple. It's literally just, kids go missing and the parents got to help save their kids. That's all it is. It's kind of like Wes Craven's New Nightmare, but not drawn out. You know what I mean? It's not boring. It's not just sitting around doing nothing for the whole movie. There's a lot more excitement to be had here. And yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect to it. It was never really a dull moment going on. Now, to my negatives, there are some negatives in terms of writing, okay? I don't think that the direction and the idea of this movie is necessarily bad, but there's a lot of moments in this movie that are just straight up padded. There's 3 specific points. All right, the first point is when this older gentleman gets introduced into the story after the mom is doing research in the library. Him coming into the story at the point he did felt a little plot conveniency. But then once you get to the climax, there may or may not be a mild revelation with that character. And it just all seems too convenient to me and like right place at the right time kind of bullshit. And I thought that was kind of cheap. There's an aspect to the homeless woman that seems so far-fetched, but given the concept is something that you kind of have to put disbelief at the door with to begin with, I kind of vibed with it, but it never really went anywhere in the movie. This whole thing they try to set up with this woman, we never really get expounded on, and it felt like a waste of time. And it also felt very plot convenience-ish that they just ended up to this point, and this woman is able to do what she's able to do. I'm not going to go into exact detail, but it involves whatever is inside of her tent that she lives in, and it's just kind of far-fetched even for this movie standards. So there's that point. And then the last point, which is perhaps the most confounding part of this entire film, is the ending itself and how the story wraps up with the ambiguity of what's going on after the events of the climax. And it may or may not involve implications on Mr. Crocket. I just don't think that should have been the exact direction to kind of leave the movie off on. That would perhaps be a good segue to start the second film, not to end the first movie. Given the story we just went through, it kind of made it feel a little all for nothing. And while it's not really plot convenience-ish, given the information that we do learn about Mr. Crocket and what it's really entailed with what's going on with him, I just feel like the movie just it took a 180 for the sake of it, and I don't know if I like it. I really don't know if I like it. So in terms of writing, those are pretty much the most annoying parts. There are some hit or miss moments and attempts at humor that I don't know if they were trying to be funny or cute, but they kind of failed to be either. And honestly, some of these characters, like the side characters we get to see in the story, minus the main woman in the film, and maybe Mr. Crocket and one other character, most of them really don't get that much fleshing going on. You get very remedial interactions. It's very surface level characterization. You don't really know shit about these characters, and as the movie goes along, you get to kind of know them a little bit better. But the writing doesn't feel organic enough to really sell me on some of these moments. I could tell that they're trying to be like emotional, and I do buy the mom's love for her son, but there's a point in the movie where you kind of forget why she's doing this. And, it kind of loses focus on that. And I also do feel that the acting chemistry was kind of off between the main mom and her son. I felt kind of a disconnect there. They should have spent a lot more time and focus on their relationship than they did to help make that connection feel a little more heartfelt by the end of it. But to each their own. The film had to find enough pace, so I can't be too mad at it, but maybe an additional 3 or 4 minutes of just seeing them bond a little further than just her tucking him into bed in that cliche kind of way would have helped, but to each their own. So yeah, that's about it for writing. I do feel like there's a lot of unorthodox moments in this movie. While I feel like the movie tries to have substance, it's mainly aiming for style. And I don't know if this is a Brandon Espy thing. This is the only movie that I know of that I've seen of his. I don't know if he's trying to push the envelope in the visuals because he's trying to bring out the nightmares, or I guess the creepypasta version of Mr. Rogers on screen. But I feel like the substance is kind of missing there because there's so much emphasis on the style. And like I said, some of these kills are creative and all of that, don't get me wrong. But, when we get down to brass tacks, there's certain directions that they go with in the movie that don't really feel all that utilized. Like, Mr. Crocket can sense when adults are kind of like watching him, but he just kind of allows this stuff to happen, which is, probably another negative to the writing again. But when we, there's a scene where we see something happen to the homeless woman, right? And then by the end of the movie, we have no context of what's happened to her, but we just get a random cut back that maybe she's okay. And I'm like, okay, then why injure her in the first place? Just why? Like, it all feels kind of pointless with some of these direction choices. And I don't really want to get into too many other ones because I'll be getting into some pretty hardcore spoilers, which I'm trying to avoid. But yeah, you'll see them when they come. I just feel like some of these points were, pointless and really serve no purpose and kind of confounding in the direction there. So there's that one. And I guess the the final negative I have with it is the fact that for a movie kind of predicated on being about a killer, Mr. Rogers, and given that we see a bunch of, I want to say a bunch, but a good amount of kids interact with this character in the movie, you would think that this film would have a bit higher of a body count, but it comes and goes. And for a film that's like less than an hour and a half, I think it's like 80 something minutes, pushing 90. Maybe if it is 90, or it might be right on the nose, or maybe a few minutes over that. The kills are very spread out in this movie. Very, very spread out. And I don't know if that's actually a good thing. Even though, the film does try to build up the creepy moments with Mr. Crocket and, the library scene, for example. That stuff is effective. And I can tip my hat to the director and the people who made this movie for at least trying to make it creepy. But I feel like they could have gone way more balls to the walls with the concept than they actually did in terms of the killing and the amount of people who die. This is another thing to take down. If you're going to make a sequel to Mr. Crocket and you make Mr. Crocket 2, go a little more ham involving that. And yeah, those are pretty much my only negatives with it, all said and done. If I had to rate this thing from a 0 to 5 star basis, if you asked me yesterday, I was leaning about a 4.25 out of 5 stars. But when I woke up this morning, I kind of realized that I didn't really love the movie as much as I thought, because I started to kind of see more flaws with it on the hindsight. So I decided to be mildly more harsher on it, but I gave this a positive rating at a 3.75 out of 5 stars, which in my opinion is a good rating. It's a good movie. I really like it. I'll rewatch it again. If it comes out on physical media, I'll probably buy it. If they have an extended cut or maybe behind the scenes of making the movie, I would love to see that. And any additional footage that might have gotten scrapped out of the film. Who knows what Hulu may force them to cut out. But yeah, this was a solid movie. And for the first, I guess, Hulu-ween original that I've seen, it makes me want to check out more from Hulu. And I'm actually excited. Streaming services are starting to come out with some fire these days. I know Tubi's making original horror movies and now Hulu's doing it. I commend that. And I think that some of these movies should be talked about more than some of these shitty theatrical movies that have come out, especially this year. But yeah, go check out Mr. Crocket if you haven't seen it before. So, yeah, in case you have seen Mr. Crocket, let me know down in the comment section if you watch this movie. Do you love this? Do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.